Okay, I'm ready.
All right, just give me one moment. I need power. Okay, welcome everyone. This is a weekly thing that we do with Dr. Admire Murray, where we just meet every Friday to discuss aspects regarding methodology. That is all what we do. We just meet and discuss these aspects of methodology. So in a couple of weeks, we talked about qualitative research, quantitative research, identification of research gaps. We talked about formulation of the research problem and all that. So this week, our focus is to look at mixed methods. And like what we said, I think we need to continue to say this, Dr. Mari, that quantitative research and qualitative research are not opposites. They're distinct methodologies. And this one that we are talking about is one that comes in the middle of the two that I said are not polar opposites, because many of the times when we read proposals and other submitted research work, people tend to think that qualitative is an opposite of quantitative, and vice versa. So we hope in this discussion you're going to get some quite good insights that can help you to shape up your proposal, to shape up your dissertation, whatever stage you are at. I hope it's not very late for you, and we hope that it's gonna improve some aspects. And previously, we also looked at this triangle that I always say it's gonna stay there until we are done with these methodology issues that we are talking about. In this triangle, we have issues of philosophy on the one side of the triangle. And we talked about this. We have got issues of designs or approaches on one side of the triangle. And in each approach or in each design, there are actually specific designs that are suitable and appropriate for quantitative, for qualitative, and mixed method. And then there is, on the other side of the triangle, there is issues of methods, where we are talking about what is your method of data collection, what is your method of analysis, what is your method of selection, and many other issues. And these aspects are actually interconnected. And as a researcher, you need to understand that. So I'll leave this time to Dr. Mari to actually break the ice. What is it that we call mixed methodology? Why do we have a blended methodology and all that? So Dr. Mari, please come on board and take us through this discussion and see how far we can go. So at the end of our presentation, we normally do an interactive session after we have presented something. Then we answer as much questions as we can do. So allow us to go through what we have worked out, and we are working out these things based on our experience of the materials we read from our students and the challenges that we have picked up from what they write, and that is what we are presenting and shaping out here. Dr. Murray.
Thanks, Dr. Warrior. So basically today we are going to be focusing more explicitly on the mixed methods approach. In other terms, you can actually hear some people talking about what they call triangulation, but we are going to talk about those terms, I think in the next slide or 2 slides after this one. So basically, let's start with the definition in terms of what we mean when we say we are talking about mixed methods research. Precisely, just like any other, research methodology, it is also, mixed methods approach has got its own philosophical assumptions, but also it also has got its own methods of inquiry. So at the level of methodology, it involves philosophical assumptions that guide the direction of the collection and analysis of data and the mixture of qualitative and quantitative approaches in many phases in the research process. So unlike a situation where you're probably going to find yourself probably dealing with only quantitative data or actually, using quantitative research methodology, mixed methods approach believes that the two research methodologies, which are quantitative and qualitative, can actually coexist and can actually be used in one or single or even multiple studies to actually understand the social phenomenon. So you are not going to be hamstrung by focusing essentially on one research methodology when you are informed by the mixed methods approach, but rather you believe that you can actually bring in the stronger aspects of qualitative research. You can also bring the stronger aspects of quantitative research to inform the research process that you want to undertake. So you can actually have a research that actually is just informed by this kind of an approach. As a method, we are saying it focuses on collecting, analyzing, and mixing both quantitative and qualitative data in a single study or a series of studies. It can be multiple studies where you can then be able to collect, analyze, and then mix different data sets using the mixed methods approach. But again, we are also saying that its central premise is that the use of quantitative and qualitative approaches in combination provides a better understanding of research problems than either approach alone. So instead of just using one approach, here we are saying if you can actually be able to merge or combine these two qualitative and quantitative research approaches, you can actually be able to understand the research problem, but even actually come up with even more interesting research findings compared to one person who's probably going to use one research methodology. Remember what we said when we started with this particular sessions. We said that oftentimes, quantitative is pretty much given to focusing more on the numericals, trying to quantify data, whereas, qualitative data, qualitative research methodologies are pretty much more focused on dealing with what we would call maybe qualitative data. So it's pretty much your thick descriptions, if you want to use those terms. You can move forward, Dr. Warrior. So as I was saying, there are so many names that you're going to see as you're trying to read around this particular subject of mixed methods approach. Some would actually call it, the integrated or the combined approach. Some would say, actually, no, when you are using this particular methods, pretty much what you are doing is pretty much you are using quantitative and qualitative research methods. Others will actually call it, it's a hybrid. Actually, some would actually call it a hybrid approach to research. Some would actually call it, a blended approach to research. Some actually would call it, as I already pointed out, actually would call it methodological triangulation, which recognizes the convergence of quantitative and qualitative data. So you have a convergence of these two approaches in one single study or in multiple studies, then which we call methodological triangulation. The other issue that is also comes to the fore is that some also call it combined research, but essentially the one that is now mostly used by many scholars is the mixed methods research. Pretty much that's the term that is now mostly used. Of course, these other terms, you can still find them in some texts that were written probably in the 90s, in the 80s. But now, if you read around anything that was published around in the 2000s, mostly by Tasha Corey and Tedley, and also Creswell, especially in the 2000s, pretty much the term that they use is actually mixed methods research. That's the term that is actually now being used in most research studies. I think you can move on, Dr. Ware. So I think here I'll just try and summarize a few things. We try and just summarize what I've been talking about. So essentially we are saying, if you are a mixed methods researcher, what essentially you do, you collect, you analyze, and you interpret both quantitative and qualitative data. And again, essentially what we are also saying is that you integrate two approaches in various ways. We are going to talk about it, how you can actually integrate these two approaches in various ways and frame the study within a specific design. But you can actually use both approaches, again, both quantitative data analysis tools to actually analyze data. You can actually use quantitative data analysis tools. You can also use qualitative data analysis in that study so that you can be able to understand. But again, you also need to use specific and adequate methods at the level of sampling, but also even at the level of analysis. We are also saying that, as we have already pointed out, I think in the formative stages of these seminars, we say that when you are operating from a quantitative research, most of the time you tend to operate with what we call closed-ended information or closed-ended questions. So already you are pretty much limiting the respondent to answer closed-ended questions, and that would allow you to come up with a particular data set that can easily be analyzed using statistical tools and also statistical formulas. Whereas if you're operating from a qualitative research methodology, you tend to use what we call open-ended questions. So pretty much you allow the informant or the respondent to then speak a lot and explain so many issues without pretty much trying to constrain them to focus on a particular issue that you would have set out to investigate. I think you can move on to I think that's what I was talking about, that qualitative data tend to focus more on what we call open-ended information, and that the researcher gathers through interviews with participants. It can be through participant observation. It could be through ethnographic studies. It also could be through focus group discussion. So pretty much, in a qualitative study, the essential issue is pretty much the use of open-ended questions so that you can be able to understand the phenomenon that you want to deal with. So I think with that, I think I'll hand over to Dr. Warrior, and then I'll come back later.
Oh, okay, thank you, Dr. Murray. So I think the idea is much clear there, that when we are focusing on mixed methodology, we are talking about blending two methodological approaches into one. So it's the blend in terms of how the data is collected. It's a blend in terms of how the analysis is done. It's a blend in terms of how the interpretation is done. So it's not a matter of you just collecting that particular data and then focus only on qualitative or quantitative. It should be a blend. So it takes us to the question now: why do we have to mix methodologies? Why do we have to blend methodologies and so forth? So I would try to talk about this and maybe allow Dr. Murray to come in and help there. So when we are talking about mixing methodologies, one of the issues is, and I always say this when I'm listening to presentations on proposals and masters and PhDs, that don't just come and present that your study is going to use mixed methods. What is the rationale behind that? What is the justification? You should be in a position to justify why mixed method is the appropriate methodology for your work, is the appropriate methodology for your study. So the reason why we normally mix the methodologies is because we would have found that doing qualitative alone is not going to help us achieve or answer the research question. So if you realize that your research question cannot be answered by one methodology, then there is need for you to mix the methodologies, because each methodology has got its own strengths, each methodology has got its own weakness. But if the problem at hand cannot be understood from only one angle, like qualitative, you need a quantitative mix in it, then there is need for you to mix the methodologies. And that's enough justification. And most of the times, this justification is missing in a number of proposals that I have examined, in a number of theses that I have examined. So it's very important that the reason for mixing the methodology comes out clearly in that section when you are writing about your methodology. So we mix it in order to offset the weakness of either qualitative or quantitative methodologies. Secondly, we also use this methodology because it gives you some kind of good evidence in terms of you understanding the nature of the research problem. And like I have always been saying, the choice of the methodology is informed by the nature of the research problem. We cannot run away from that. So if the research problem cannot be understood from a quantitative perspective, it requires both perspectives, then that should be the justification you should use, that I am mixing methodology because I'm seeking a comprehensive understanding of the problem that I'm dealing with, which cannot be solved either quantitatively alone or qualitatively alone, but a mix of these methodologies is likely to be helpful. So it's that whole narrative that I often find missing when students are doing their methodologies. You ask them, why are you doing a mixed method? They don't give you proper justification. But this is the kind of reasoning that examiners and other people, when they're reading your work, are looking forward to hear from you. So mixed methods, it also helps answer those research questions that cannot be answered from a quantitative point alone, that cannot be answered from a qualitative point alone. So these are some of the reasons why we have to blend the methodologies, why we have to combine the methodologies, why we have to mix the methodologies. Dr. Mare, you are free to come in here and add more on why do we have to mix these methodologies.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Warren. So essentially, as you were pointing out, the issue here is to make sure that you try and, offset different weaknesses that these methodologies come with. So as we pointed out that, in as much as quantitative, is good, it also has got its own weaknesses. It has got its own strengths, but it also has got its own weaknesses. Similarly, qualitative has got its own strengths, but it also has got its own weaknesses. So in order to be able to balance out that equation, the mixed method approach becomes something that is viable, something that can then be able to give you probably a more valid and a reliable data set compared to just focusing on one of these research methodologies. Because with mixing the two, you are likely to be able to understand the research problem better, as Dr. Woy has pointed out, but you can then be able also to bring in different kind of approaches in terms of, filling up the gaps that usually comes with probably focusing on one research methodology. For example, let's say you are doing a study and maybe it's a quantitative study, and mostly what you are going to do probably is just administer questionnaires. So what a mixed method approach would actually help you to do is that probably you're going to start with that, rolling out that questionnaire to the people that you have chosen as part of your respondents. Once you have done that, you analyze the data set that is coming from the questionnaire, and you can pick up from a questionnaire that probably people from a particular region are saying certain things. For you to be able to follow up and be able to unpack those things that they are talking about, you can then follow up probably with doing focus group discussions with the people that are coming from that particular region, or probably with face-to-face interviews to understand more about the issues that they were raising. If they were raising certain concerns about probably, let's say, service delivery, you can only be able then to be able to fill up those gaps that you have identified through the administering your own questionnaire by doing probably a face-to-face interview, or probably doing a focus group discussions, depending on the context in which you are operating. So in that regard, using both research methodologies actually is more beneficial to a researcher than probably just focusing on one. But again, it depends on what you are, the problem at hand, that is the one that determines how you are going to deal. And the other issue that we also just want to talk about is that when you are using a mixed methods research approach, it encourages the use of multiple worldviews or paradigms, as we have already pointed out when we talked about paradigms. We said, for example, if you are a positivist researcher, you are more inclined to use quantitative researcher. But if you are a constructivist or an interpretivist researcher at a paradigm level, you are likely to start using qualitative research. So mixed methods approach allows you to be able to combine all these seemingly antagonistic approaches. And that allows you then to be able to engage with research from a more deeper level than actually we would be able to do when we are just focusing on one specific research methodology. And the other issue is to say that mixed methods research is also very practical in the sense that the researcher is free to use all methods possible to address a research problem. Unlike a situation where, for example, you're saying you're doing a qualitative study. Already you are limited. Once you say your study is qualitative, you're already limited. In as much as you want to use questionnaire, you can't do that unless you then move and say, no, now I'm doing a mixed methods approach. So the advantage of actually doing a mixed methods approach is that you are able to use any data collection instrument that is at your disposal. It can be questionnaire, it can be a face-to-face interview, it could be a focus group discussion, it could be document analysis, it could be anything that you can think of, because or remember, you are operating within the mixed methods research, so you have all these data collection instruments at your disposal, so you can always call upon them and use them to your advantage to understand a research problem much better than somebody who is probably who becomes a prisoner to a certain research methodological orientation. In this case, probably we're talking about just focusing yourself on qualitative or quantitative. You can move on, Dr. Warrior.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mary. So the idea there is for you to determine if you are overcoming limitations, if you want to understand the problem you are dealing with much better, and you are trying to demonstrate that solving my research question is not entirely possible if I am to do it from a qualitative perspective alone, or from a positivist approach or a philosophy alone. So it really has the justification for me. It has to come out strongly. And I should reiterate at this point that when we are writing methodology section, I am more interested in why it is being used. What's the rationale? What's the justification there? So for those of you who are still writing proposals, or we are still writing their work, you need to justify why is it the appropriate one? Why is the other one not good enough? So it's your responsibility as a researcher to justify that I'm using this approach because I want to have a better understanding of the problem, because using data set from a qualitative or a quantitative is not going to help. So that has to come out very clearly, where you mentioned that this study is going to use a mixed method approach. The next thing that I would like to hear, especially from my side, is why that methodology and all that. So it is very important for the research, for the researcher himself or herself to make sure that the methodology is sufficiently justified. So like what I have pointed out there, in most of the proposals and the thesis that I have read and examined, mixed method is usually said in passing, but there is no proper justification of why are you using the mixed methods approach, or what is the rationale. So it's very clear, and we are deliberately repeating this because it's that information that is missing, and examiners are worried about that, and supervisors are worried about all that. So it has to be justified. What's the rationale, right? So going further in this discussion, it is also important to note that there are so many rationales of using a mixed method. Some scholars have talked about triangulation, complementing methodologies. the issues of development, the issues of initiation and expansion. And it is this framework that we are talking about. I'm sure Dr. Mary would come in there and trying to unpack further the aspect of triangulation and the rest. So you would find out the rationale of using a mixed methodology. One of it is you are really concerned, you want to triangulate the data, and it also forms one of the designs within a mixed method, where we talk about convergent mixed method or convergent parallel mixed method design. So in this angle, you are talking, your idea is you want to use quantitative and qualitative methods for you to be in a position to corroborate the findings that you would have done. And when you are doing this, or especially when you are doing convergent, I know we are going to talk about it later, the same construct should be measured using two methodologies. So if my construct is I'm measuring loyalty amongst students, I should collect that particular construct's data from all the two sides of the methodology. So I should measure it in a qualitative, I should measure it in a quantitative, because my idea, my aim in this is I want to corroborate the findings. So this may also be an unanticipated outcome of the study, where perhaps a mixed methods was undertaken for another reasons, but convergence was evident, and that's the reason why perhaps we do triangulate. So we also do what is it called, mixed methodology, because we want to expand something. Like what I did in my PhD, I did my data collection in phases. Because I am predominantly on the quantitative side of things, but because someone was from the qualitative side of things in my supervisory team, they first wanted me to first do some initial phase where I do some data collection, so where I developed some skills in a qualitative manner. So I need to interview some people. So you can actually do a mixed methodology because you want to do an expansion of the research that you are working on. So your first phase is the first phase is the one that requires you to have findings qualitatively. Then after you have done that, then you expand it perhaps to a quantitative idea and all that. Perhaps you would have found unexpected findings like what Dr. Mare was saying, and then you would need to explain those findings. Then the other rationale is for you to explore. An initial phase is required, especially when you are developing an instrument. And it's also something that I had to do, is when you are developing an instrument, you had to do some exploration, identify some variables of the study. Then perhaps you develop some hypothesis that then requires testing. Then the other one is the issue of completeness. Then the other one is the issue of offsetting weakness. We have done that. We have explained that before. Then the other one is the issue. If you have got two sets of questions in your proposal, in your thesis, in your research article, if you have got quantitative questions and qualitative questions, you have enough justification of why a mixed methodology is required. Most of the times you find people want to use mixed methods, but when you look at their questions, none of them requires the other methodology, and it becomes difficult to do that. So if you have got both quantitative and qualitative research questions, then you have got good justification why a mixed methodology is the appropriate methodology for your study. Over to you, Dr. Mary. You can take the discussion further, especially on the issue of triangulation or other aspects that you can clarify better than what I have done. You are muted.
Okay, you can move on to the next, then I will be able to unpack some of these issues. So basically, as we have already pointed out, in terms of the terms that can actually be used, we have seen that you can actually use the term mixed methods, which is now essentially the politically correct statement to use, or you can actually use triangulation. So as part of this, trying to unpack what this triangulation or mixed methods is all about, Denzin in 1978 came up with 4 basic types of triangulation that can actually be done. So at one level, you can actually do triangulation at the level of what we call data triangulation, whereby you are using multiple data sources in a single study. So for example, you can say probably you are going to use a questionnaire, you're going to use a focus group discussion, you're going to use a face-to-face interview, you are also going to use probably document analysis, probably you're going to do content analysis, depending on the nature of the problem. That if you are going to use that type of thing, you have to be able to demonstrate in your proposal or even in the thesis that you are actually triangulating these sources at the level of data triangulation. That's essentially what you are going to do. And you must be able to justify why is it that you are doing that. Or you can actually do this at the level the level of number 2, which we call investigator triangulation. Here, probably you're going to use multiple investigators or researchers to study a particular phenomenon. So for example, instead of just you being the main research player or the researcher, you can actually probably, especially at PhD level, you can actually be able to even employ research assistants to assist you to probably administer questionnaires, but even to do interviews. But again, as we are going to talk about it probably beyond after this, is that you as the main researcher still remains reliable, the most important person, because you must know whatever is happening in the field. Because if you don't know that and you rely on what other people are going to tell you, you are likely to not be able to understand what is really happening in the context. So you must always understand your context beyond the people that you have sent out to help you to actually come up with a particular data set. And then we can also talk about what we call theory triangulation, where you are using different theoretical concepts or theoretical frameworks to understand a particular phenomenon. So for example, we were talking about it before and said probably you want to use hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Probably you want to then, bring another theory probably that is going to help you to deal with motivation at the level of organization. Probably you're going to bring in McGregor's theory, X and Y, as another motivation theory that you want to bring to the fore. Once you have those 2 theories or 3 theories, now we are already operating at what we call theory triangulation. So again, you don't only triangulate at the level of data and also investigate, but you can actually triangulate again at the level of theory. So where you are using multiple theoretical frameworks. And here, the number 4, we are saying the 4th one is a methodological triangulation, where you use multiple methods to conduct a study. As we have already pointed out, you can use quantitative, qualitative methods to actually understand a particular research problem that you want to deal with. So it depends at what level do you want to triangulate, or at what level do you want to use these mixed methods. But at the end of the day, as Dr. Woyo was saying, the most important thing in anything that concerns research, whether it is in terms of your research proposal, or it's your study, when you are writing this particular section or this particular chapter, please make sure that everything that you write is backed by an understanding of saying why is it that you chose that particular route and not any other. So justification becomes very key. If you don't do that, then you are likely to find out that people are going to send back the paper to you and say, please, can you clarify why is it that you chose to use this particular method and why not the other? Why did you choose to go the qualitative route and not the other route? And what are the issues that you were trying to avoid? So it must be very clear. I think you can move on to the next. And you proceed, Dr. Woyo.
All right, so thank you for that. So these are some of the critical questions that you need to ask yourself when you're doing a mixed method approach. The first one, which we have hammered, I think since the beginning of this conversation, was you need to provide the reasons. Why are you using both methodologies? Why are you using a blended methodology? Why are you mixing quantitative and qualitative? So the reasons for using this should be provided. Secondly, you as a researcher, it's one thing to write about, I want to use mixed methods, but it's another thing for you as a researcher to actually show you have a sense of what mixed method is about. Because it's your responsibility as a researcher and someone who is doing a doctoral or master's degree to make sure that you have got an understanding of what mixed method is. So I'm asking here, does the researcher have a sense of using mixed methods? Do you have that sense? Do you have that understanding? Because it's very important. Is the design identified and is it justified? So we have got a number of designs. I think the most common ones is the convergent, the explanatory sequential design, and the exploratory sequential design. And we are getting there. We have got advanced designs as well in mixed method, like the one that we call embedded design. Is it identified? Is it justified? So even if you are to use convergent, you need to give a justification why. If you are to use an explanatory sequential design, there is need for answering the question why. If you are using an exploratory, you should also give the same justification to that. And you also need to tick this one. Are the procedures of data collection and analysis mentioned, and do they relate to the design? So you can choose one design and you might miss on the methods of analysis. So your choice of your design should also be in sync with what is the method of analysis that you're going to employ in a sequential, because a sequential explanatory sequential requires something different from an exploratory sequential, or perhaps from an embedded mixed method design. So you need to make sure this aspect is critically addressed. The sampling strategies, you need to think of sampling strategies for the qualitative side. You need to think of sampling strategies for the quantitative side, because you are blending that. And unfortunately, you can't simply say, because I have used that and I am using this, unless it is properly justified. So the sampling strategies, the methods of selection, they need to speak to the design. They need to speak to the methodology, which in this case is a blended one. Are there specific data analysis procedures that you have indicated? So you should be in a position to indicate how the qualitative data is going to be analyzed, how the quantitative data is going also to be analyzed, as well as the issues of validation and et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of moving forward, at this point, we want to go into a small discussion and just to highlight to you what are some of the designs that we have been talking about. So there are several typologies of classifying these aspects, and it can actually be confusing both to an experienced guy and to a novice researcher, especially in these mixed methods and all that. So some of these designs are actually complex, and they actually require you to have a sense of the mixed method usage and a sense of understanding all that. So it's all that we need to understand. So in this discussion, we were going to go through for you the idea of convergent, exploratory sequential, explanatory sequential, and perhaps look at the embedded intervention, which I said is a more advanced. So in other words, these are the designs that are more popular among mixed methods researchers, and we want to go through each one of them. So where I would start here before I give Dr. Mare some time is this one is what we call a convergent parallel design. It is a convergent parallel design. So it is converging there where it is written compare and contrast. That's where the convergent is coming from. So in this idea, in this design, if you are to use mixed methods, you are actually collecting data parallel. So you collect quantitative data, you collect qualitative data. And like I said, you should be measuring similar constructs. So don't collect a different data set in a quantitative aspect of this design and a different data set in a qualitative aspect of this design. So it's actually very important for you to make sure that when you are looking at this, you are collecting the same data, but parallel using the quantitative and the qualitative approach. So like if you are to do there in the quantitative, your data collection becomes your questionnaire, and then you analyze the data, you get the results, you wait there, you collect the data. In qualitative research, you analyze the results, you come up with you do the data analysis, come up with the results, and then you do compare the results, compare them, and then contrast them, and then you do interpretation. So usually the challenge you have in convergent mixed method design is how to actually converge or how to actually merge this particular data. And this takes me back to that idea where I have said, do you have a sense of using a mixed method? Over to you, Dr. Maride. I think you are muted.
Okay, just to add to what you were saying. So essentially, as you were saying, this kind of a design, it runs parallel. So whereas other people are running with the quantitative, research and doing whatever they have to do in terms of data collection, analysis, and then interpreting the results, it's happening at the other end. And on the other side, you have people that are also doing a qualitative research, and again, using their own data collection instruments, data analysis tools. And then when they interpret their results, they must come to a point where you can then sit on the same table and then start to compare and contrast the results that are coming from different data sets. And it is only at that level, that's when convergence actually then happens. It happens at that level. But there are some designs that are different from this kind of an approach where you have to converge after doing. For some, you have to make sure that you synchronize almost everything from start until you get to the finish. That's what I would say for now.
Oh, okay. So in other words, you can actually, at this design, you can actually first report your quantitative findings. Then you go on to report your qualitative findings. And when you, like what Dr. Mari was saying, mixed methods researchers, they call it side-by-side approach. It's a side-by-side approach. And there's also issues for you to make sure that when you are doing interpretation in the convergent approach, it is actually written into a discussion section of the study, whereas the results section reports only the findings. So you find out that in a mixed method research, the way we would structure our work is totally different, perhaps the way we would do it in a quantitative and the way we would do it in a qualitative. And you also need to make sure that issues of validity there have been dealt with. Then the next one that we have here is what we call the exploratory sequential mixed design. Exploratory sequential mixed design. So in this design, perhaps you would have argued that no, literature is very limited or what. So what you need to do here is to make sure that you first collect qualitative data. You collect the qualitative data, you collect it, you analyze it, you get the results. Then after getting the results, you need to identify qualitative results that you need now to test on a larger population. Remember, qualitative researchers, they only collect data from a few people. So if you collect this, you analyze it, and then you identify aspects of the qualitative analysis that you would have found, and then you need now to test it on a much larger sample. Then you go on to do your quantitative. So in other words, when you have found out your qualitative results, you can even go to a stage where you need even to come up with an instrument. After qualitative results, you come up with an instrument that you are going to collect data, quantitative data for a larger sample, and then test that and get the results, and then you come up with the overall interpretation. Dr. Mari, you can come in there and also add some points.
Yeah, so as you were rightfully pointing out here, the issue is to say that one of the research methodologies, maybe it could be quantitative or it could be qualitative in this kind of a design, one of them serves as almost like a pilot study that then guides the whole process moving forward. So probably if you start with a qualitative study and you probably do in-depth interviews and you found out a certain kind of phenomenon is happening, from that data set, you can then use that data set to actually come up with questionnaire, a more comprehensive questionnaire that can then be administered to a number of people that are actually happening in that particular environment where you are trying to do your research. So unlike the first one that we are talking about, where you are doing it side by side or parallel, this one, it has to be sequential in the sense that you start with one of the research methodologies is actually giving you a ground to actually pilot and actually to test the ground in terms of understanding what really is happening in that particular environment where you want to do research. And then you then cascade that process by doing probably a larger, questionnaire administration in that particular environment, and then you analyze the data and then you present it as part of the interpretation.
Okay, so that is what you have. Of course, there are challenges to this in terms of issues of validity, in terms of issues of reliability and all that. So then the third design that is available for you is the one where we are saying you need to do an explanatory sequential design. So with an explanatory sequential design, what you first need to do is to do quantitative data collection, and then you analyze that quantitative data you have, and then you follow up with a qualitative data collection and analysis, and then you do it. So you would find out that in the first one, in the exploratory, you actually use qualitative in order to build to quantitative. In this one, you use quantitative in order for you to do a follow-up with qualitative research. And this is actually very important for you as a mixed method researcher. Let me admit someone. So the data collection here, it proceeds in two distinct steps. So firstly, you need to do a rigorous quantitative sampling or a rigorous quantitative data collection, and then secondly, you follow up with it in a qualitative idea or in a qualitative strategy. So one of the challenges that you find is, will you be able to plan adequately with quantitative results to follow up on the second phase? That is normally one of the challenges that you can find when you are using this particular design. Dr. Murray, you can come in.
Essentially, as you have pointed out again, I think the issue again is that it's about sequence. I think following the sequence is the most important. Whereas in the first one, which we're talking about, you start with the qualitative. This one, you are pretty much starting with the quantitative data collection and analysis. Again, probably you can do a pilot kind of, questionnaire administration in a particular, research setting, to get a sense of what is really happening, what are the challenges, probably in terms of service delivery. And from there, based on what you would have found from that questionnaire, then you move in probably with your interviews, move in with your focus group discussions to get more, thicker descriptions in terms of what really is happening and how people actually are interfacing with that particular challenge that you want to look at. And then at the end, then you start talking about then how do I interpret these findings? How do I make sense of the findings that are coming from this qualitative data collection and analysis tool that I'm using?
So in other words, when you are doing this, it is also important for you to group your respondents into categories so that you'll be able to follow up on them. Let's say maybe there is a category that has given you some different kind of answers, a small category even compared to the larger sample, and then you need to follow up on that. And when you are doing this, one of the challenges is, my students always ask me, do I need to go and follow up with the same respondents? And my answer to that is an emphatically yes, you need to do that, because the intention is to really understand what were they thinking when they were doing that. If you go and ask a different data set, then it becomes a different study altogether, which doesn't speak to the things that you really need to gain an in-depth understanding, on. So I think this one is the last one. Dr. Mare, you can take this one.
Okay, so this one is the last one, which we call an embedded mixed method design, whereby you have you have qualitative either being the umbrella, or you can actually have quantitative being the umbrella, but underneath there, everything is happening within the same set. So unlike where we are saying you have to start with one step and then you move to the step, everything is embedded in each other there. So you can embed your questionnaire within that particular research project that you are doing, and also you can make sure that the semi-structured questionnaire or semi-structured interviews also are also part of the data collection instruments. And as the result, you also probably combine that with document analysis. So everything goes at once in one go. But we are also saying that it could be qualitative or quantitative data collection before, during, and after. It depends on what exactly you want. It's not like where you are saying systematically you have to follow a sequential order, where you are saying for this particular design, for example, if we are dealing with the explanatory or exploratory mixed method research design, where you're saying you have to start with the qualitative. In this one, it's up to you. But again, it has to happen in such a way that you have embedded your different data collection instruments and also data analysis instruments. It doesn't matter which one comes first, but as long as you're doing it concurrently, but also making sure that you have embedded everything into that research project, so that at the end of the day, when you come up with the data set, everything can then be analyzed and interpreted as just one research, not parallel research projects that were happening at the same time.
All right, so this is also an element of transformative mixed, it's an advanced mixed method. So we have this embedded, and I think you were talking about some other, you can have multiple of them in terms of having qualitative study with reported in stud 1, stud 2, stud 3, and you can actually do it in sequence and many other aspects. I don't know if you have got other issues to say here, maybe before we open this discussion this conversation for discussion with the audience.
Okay, so let me just try and look at whether, if you, for example, let's say you want to do a single study and you want to use a mixed method approach, what could be the possible routes that you can take? For example, if you are dealing with what we call a single study, for example, let's say I just want to understand the motivation, the levels of motivation within a particular organization, and that is pretty much a single study. So probably I just want to use different methodologies. Only, instead of just focusing on qualitative, I also want to bring in the quantitative aspect. When we are doing a quantitative study, a single study mixed method approach, essentially what we are saying is that, for example, you can actually have your quantitative data set, then you have your qualitative data set. Once you have the two mixed together, then you at the end of the day, when you mix the two of them, you can come up with what we call reported results or outcomes, whatever you want to call. But if you want to do what we call a multiple mixed method study, then that's when we are saying one study, maybe you can then break them into phases to say, the first one, we are going to pretty much focus on quantitative studies. And once we are done with the quantitative study, we then come up with the reported results and put it there. And then the second phase, which is probably study number 2, we're going to do a qualitative study, come up with the reported results and put it there. And then probably if you want to have another phase again, you can then probably go back again and do further qualitative study and then come up with the reported results. And after all these phases, that's when you sit down and then compare and contrast that which we were talking about when we were talking about the different research, mixed method research designs that you can actually use. So it depends on what exactly you want to use. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand which design are you going to use? Are you going to just use explanatory? Are you going to use exploratory? Are you going to use the embedded approach? And you have to justify why you think that the embedded mixed methods approach or design actually works better for your particular audiences or research. And as we're already pointing out, so in terms of just summarizing, what then comes up is that it's either you are merging or converging two data sets, as we were saying. So when you are pretty much operating at the level of what we're talking about, exploratory and also explanatory, pretty much you are merging and converging two data sets. That's essentially what you're doing. And also probably, again, you are also connecting two data sets by having one build on the other. So we've already also talked about it. But when we are embedding, we are saying one data set is within the other so that one type of data provides a supportive role of the other data set. So in an embedded design, it's about making sure that one type of data set provides a supporting role rather than actually complements rather than competes against the data set that is already there. That's the most important. Embedding is done so that you support another data set that you already have. That's the main reason why we do embedded mixed methods research designs.
Okay. So I think this is pretty much what we were talking about, and
yes,
and all that. Maybe as a way of just summarizing this before we start with the question and answer session is whenever you are choosing your what is it called, your mixed method design, you need to think about these other aspects. Or what is your expected outcome in this research? If your expected outcome is about merging the two databases to show how the data converges or how the data converges, then the recommended design for you is actually a convergent parallel mixed method design. And the reason why you are choosing this is because you want to compare different perspectives that are drawn from quantitative research versus those that are drawn from qualitative research. Then if your outcome is you want a more in-depth understanding of quantitative results, perhaps maybe in terms of cultural relevance or some other perspective, then the reasoning around here is you want to explain quantitative results with qualitative data. So the recommended or the most appropriate mixed method design for you, it becomes the explanatory sequential. It becomes the explanatory sequential because all you want is to explain quantitative results with qualitative data. Then if you want to develop better measurement instruments, then what you would need there is an exploratory sequential design. An exploratory sequential design is actually the recommended if one of the reasons for you using mixed method is first you want to develop better measurement instruments. You first need to collect qualitative data, analyze it, then use that qualitative data to develop up the scales that you are going to use in your quantitative research. Then your expected outcome is actually a test of better measures, a test of better scales in measuring the issues that you want from your sample population. Then the reason for if your reason for choosing mixed method is to understand experimental results by incorporating perspectives of individual, you want to understand experimental results by incorporating perspective of individuals, then what you would need here is an embedded mixed method design. This is actually an advanced mixed method design, like what Dr. Mare was saying, because it helps you to understand participants' views within the context of an experiment or within the intervention that you are actually putting. Then if your outcome is actually for a call for action, or your reason is you want to develop an understanding of needed changes, let's say for marginalized groups, marginalized groups or marginalized shareholders or something like that, then you might need a transformative mixed method design. And then lastly, if you want to understand the need for an impact of an intervention you have made, an intervention that is being implemented, then you need a multi-phase. You need a multi-phase mixed method design. You need a multi-phase mixed method design. So I think it has been quite a long discussion we were having. We would like to end here and take a couple of questions. If there are a couple of questions, we actually hope we have given you some ideas if you are to do a mixed research methodology, and how you're gonna put in some issues together and try to push the agenda for your methodology to be considered appropriate by whoever is listening to you. So if there are any questions, we are free to say them, and then we are free to respond here. I see there is also Dr. Mnangatire from the Health Sciences. Is our frequent guest. I'm sure he's learning a lot of quantitative research. So one of these days he wants to use mixed methods. We welcome you to today's session. I don't know, in the chat box, let me see. Dr. Mnangatire is asking me, or Dr. Mare, to say, can I use mixed methods in which research questions are not related? I'm not sure what is the issue of not being related, but you would need to use mixed methods. If you are saying they are not related, then how the question is, how are you going to do the study anyway? So I'm assuming that the research questions you are talking about, they've actually stemmed out of your research problem, and one of them is measuring quantitative relationships, and the other one is measuring, perhaps you want to understand in in-depth a phenomena. So you can actually use that. I'm not so sure on the aspect of how unrelated are the questions, because if they're unrelated, then it means your study can either go each direction and you might not be able to bring it back. Dr. Mare, you can also come here and answer this one. It reads, can I use mixed methods in which the research questions are not related?
I would say probably can you explain further exactly what he means by that, so that we can be able to deal with that. But I think there's another question that is just coming while it's
okay. Another one says, so okay, we give Dr. Mnangatire to come online and say what he is talking about. Can I use convergent parallel design for different participants, or it should be the same participants? Can I use convergent parallel design for different participants?
I would say that you have to use it for both, for not for different participants, but the same. Let's say it's the same. It should be the same research setting where you are doing your research. So, for example, let's say, for example, you have done a quantitative study on a particular area. You must do so. If you are using both, both quantitative and quantitative, it should all apply to the same research context, rather than to say you have done quantitative research here, and then you want to go and probably do a convergent parallel design for another totally different setting. So for me, the research participants must remain the same, and the same research field must be the one that be used to understand that particular phenomenon using the convergent parallel mixed methods research design.
All right. Also, to add on to that, her name is difficult, Cindy. In terms of your data collection, you actually use the same sample. The difference is in your qualitative side, you would need fewer respondents. And it is the same fewer respondents that we would also encourage you to give them the questionnaire for them to fill up. So in the qualitative data collection process, the issue of sample size is at stake here. In qualitative, it's smaller. In quantitative, it has to be big in that regard. So if you measure it differently from different people, you might find out that because remember we are saying in a quantitative, in a mixed method, the same construct must be measured parallel. So if you are measuring whether people like online learning or not, and you have measured it from a different sample that you have only done interviews and you have not given them questionnaires, you will not be able to see if your data is actually converging or if your data is actually what is it called, if it is diverging. So it should be the same. Then Danford is asking here, how do I balance space constraints in a journal article? For instance, if I apply mixed methods, I may be forced to use theoretical frameworks which will take up space. Quantitative studies also tend up to separate findings from discussion, whereas qualitative combines. Journal space. Yeah, you see, most of the journals, they would ask you, we want 7,000 words, we want 8,000 words, we want, there's only one journal that I have seen that can give me latitude to write between 10 and 12,000 words. But in terms of, what is it called? In terms of space, for me, it is about reporting results that matters. There is really no need to report everything that you find in your study. And like I was having a conversation with someone in the afternoon, I keep some of the data and keep some of the findings for another research article, Danford. It's gonna help you in all that. Get what you think is actually important in answering the research question you have at the moment, and leave out what you think is not quite important for now, but you can actually use it to write another research article later. That is my suggestion. It can help you manage space. I don't know what Dr. Murray, how will you answer that one?
Yeah, I would also say that it's very important to know what to include and what to exclude when you're writing a journal article. Because even under research methodology or the methodology section in a journal article, not everything has to be reported. It's about being precise and also straight to the point in terms of articulating what are the steps that you undertook to get that particular data set that you have, and what could have motivated those kinds of steps in terms of justifying them, and then everything else. So I would say that when you are writing a journal article, for me, the issue is that everything else, including your introduction, background, literature, methods, and everything, should just eat up something like a third of the paper. The 2/3 must be about presentation of the findings and the analysis. That's the reason why you are writing that paper. Anything else is not really important. It's just the icing on the cake. But what people are reading your journal article for is essentially to get to understand what are the findings that you got, and how did you analyze the findings, and what are the recommendations, if any, and the conclusions. Anything else is just an icing on the top.
Okay, the next question is about when using explanatory sequential design, would one have to conduct a survey and follow up with interviews with all participants, or could select a sample to interview? Maybe I think you joined a little late, but when you are doing an explanatory sequential design, you need to first collect quantitative data and analyze it. And what is more important here for me is for you to find out the outliers, or for you to find out those other results that are known. Like, for example, I know you understand the normal distribution. I want those people who are out there in the normal distribution curve to be followed up with the interview. So like what I was saying, you might want to find out a small group in your data set whose responses perhaps were kind of different from the majority. And then you need to go and follow up on those people. And yes, you use interviews or you can even use a focus group discussion so that you can get an understanding. Why were they completing the survey that way, or why were they giving those kind of answers? So it's actually important for you to do a follow-up with those people or with those individuals, so that you tend to understand what was the reasoning around the responses that they have given you in a quantitative data set. Dr. Mare, you can also add more there. I think people today are on fire. They like mixed methods than any other methodology.
So I think what you have just pointed out is very important. Recently, we were analyzing a data set from a research that we have been doing on COVID-19 here in Namibia. And when you're talking about the outlier issues that you're talking about, as part of the questionnaire, there are certain, for example, people in Vango East there, most of the people there were complaining that they couldn't get access to information around COVID-19 because they don't have access to television and all that kind of thing. And all of a sudden here, in the same data set, you hear somebody talking that I was getting my information from watching CNN, BBC. All of a sudden, then you ask yourself, but why is it that all of a sudden these 2 or 3 people are talking about this, yet the most of the people that have been surveyed in this particular region are talking about these challenges that they are facing? So those outlier cases can be actually the participants that you can then target using non-probability sampling techniques to then understand why could they have been able to have access to this information, which most of the people actually probably couldn't have access to at this point in time. So it's always important to note outlier cases, but also to follow up on those out of this world kind of responses that you can find in a questionnaire to say, but what could have motivated this? So how do we be able to know more about this particular issue? So when we are saying sampling techniques still have to be adhered to. So if, for example, if you are going to use probability sampling techniques, use the probability sampling techniques for the quantitative side of things. But when you are doing your qualitative, again, use non-probability sampling techniques to select your findings. So again, issues of sampling should be adhered to and when you are doing your research. So it's not an issue of saying, once I've done administer a questionnaire, I'm going to interview everybody again. No, it's not everyone. But now we are now using non-probability sampling techniques to actually follow up on those outlier cases and out of this world responses.
But Doc, a quick question.
Yes.
Don't those outliers present an opportunity for future research rather than going back to them? Is that not an opportunity for you to say, when I was doing this research, these sort of things emerged, but they were not within the scope of my delimitation, and that gives you an opportunity for future research? Don't they present that opportunity?
Yeah, they do present, but not in a mixed method approach. But if you were doing one approach to methodology, then you can write that. But in a mixed method approach, you are not supposed to give us that room, because one of the reasons why you are using a mixed method approach is to offset the weakness of the other. So if you are putting it back to us to say we need to do further research, then what were you doing when you were doing your mixed method? So you need to look at them, because we are looking at a situation where you have first done a quantitative research and you have analyzed quantitative research results, and your design was explanatory, sequential. So there should be a sequence. So we are simply saying, when you have done your quantitative analysis, then you need to follow it up with a qualitative analysis. And one of the issues that you need to do is to find out those ideas that were in outlier position and try to understand them, because quantitative results would have dismissed them because they are outliers, or you would have found out some certain results have not been significantly predicted. But when you go and do a follow-up in an interview, you might get some interesting perspectives. And that's the whole reason for you doing a mixed method. But you can give us that idea as a future research if your research was predominantly quantitative, and would say some of the results that didn't test negatively, that didn't test significantly positive, they need to, the future research might consider using qualitative research in order to understand what do these things really mean. But in a mixed method approach, if I am to review an article, I will put a reject. If I am to mark this dissertation, I will send it back. If I am to mark this proposal, I will send it back. I don't know, Dr. Mario, you can come in. You are free to ask further further questions on this, Ishmael. Let me ask Dr. Mario to come in, or maybe I've been too harsh on that.
You are giving me suggestions. I'm here sitting down marking a PhD thesis from South Africa with the similar predicament where I find myself trying to understand where the person actually used the mixed methods approach. But when you see how the data analysis was done and how the justification was done, it seems as if they were only focusing on qualitative. And again, that poses serious problems in terms of the foundational in structure of that particular thesis. But be that as it may, I think it's very important that once you are using a mixed methods approach, there's no room for you to say, this is an area for further research, because already you have all the tools, the data collection instruments at your disposal. You have all the data analysis tools at your disposal. So why are you throwing it back on your reader to say, this can be done further? You have to give us answers because you have all the tools at your disposal. So in a mixed methods approach, you have no room to maneuver. Simply, you have to make sure that you give us a well-rounded answer to the particular phenomenon that you are dealing with, because you have all the instruments at your disposal to actually analyze a social phenomenon.
Doc, whilst I'm hearing you, I think what you are suggesting, you are saying if you do a mixed methods, you have got your scope and your delimitation, and you've got your objectives, and you are saying there should never be anything that can emerge on both sides, even if you do triangulation. There should never be anything that emerges. Your research has got finality to it. I beg to differ with that thinking or analogy.
No,
and I'll give you citations. It's only that I joined a bit late, but I'll give you why I'm reasoning in that way. To say, from your suggestion, you are saying, if you do mixed methods, there is finality in it. I'm thinking there is rigor. It's very rigorous in terms of triangulation, that you are taking two approaches to fulfill the objectives. But if you suggest that there is finality in it, I don't know, maybe colleagues may say something, but I'll give you two articles that suggest or say otherwise.
What I'm saying to you is you can't say to me that these aspects that you found in your quantitative research and you were following an explanatory design, you didn't follow up in them in a qualitative research, and you are suggesting that should form a part of future research. That is what I am saying. It's not pretty good enough in a mixed method, because you have identified those issues after analyzing quantitative results, and you have proposed a sequential design. So why are you not following them up in a qualitative phase of the design? I don't know.
And also, just to say, we are not saying that it's finality. We are not saying that there's finality, because of course any study is always open to limitations. That one we cannot run away from it. As much as mixed methods gives us a rigorous approach in terms of understanding our social phenomenon, it still has got its own weaknesses, because at the end of the day, one method becomes more dominant, one research method becomes more dominant over the other. It doesn't mean that you are going to use qualitative research design in the same way you are going to use quantitative this. You can't, somehow, one of the research methodologies is going to be dominant, and that will tilt the kind of data set that you're going to come up with. Essentially, that's what ends up happening. But essentially what we are saying is that once you are using mixed methods approach, you have got sufficient ammunition at your disposal to be able to answer some of these things, to say, somebody could go on and do further research, because at the end of the day, things that are going to emerge from a quantitative, you can still have a room to actually use a qualitative to also to compensate for the weaknesses that are actually coming from a quantitative. Similarly, if you are seeing there are limitations that are coming from a qualitative, you can still use a quantitative instrument again to offset the weaknesses that are coming from a qualitative. So that way you can be able to balance the equation. We are not saying that it brings finality or it is going to make sure that you can't question that data set. The data set can still be questioned even if it's at the level of mixed methods, because there are still other issues that usually come as a result of actually converging or even embedding research methodologies in one research project. It's always bound to be, there are certain challenges that are going to come to the fore there.
Open to, if it is an explanatory sequential, I'm actually more open to the issues that you would have found later in an interview, that you think these issues that have been raised after a follow-up, they require quantitative research or they require quantitative measurement. Those ones can actually constitute further studies. But to just say after you have done quantitative research and you are doing an explanatory sequential, and then you have already identified limitations for future studies, that is perhaps what I am not very much comfortable with. But if you have done your quantitative data collection, analyzed it, do a follow-up with the qualitative data collection and analyze it, then other issues that have emerged from your in-depth understanding in a qualitative when you are interpreting your data, those other issues can actually be now said, this is what I have done in my PhD, in my article and all that kind of stuff. And I would encourage further researchers or further research to actually test the relationship of these variables, because they would have emerged at the end of your mixed method, approach. I don't know whether it's still there, but we can take the discussion forward. I still have a few questions that I need to read here. Is the sample size a factor in mixed method? Yes, it is. Meaning, should I take the sample? Should I take the same sample, give the questionnaire to the same people I'll be interviewing? So the sample size, you need to have the sample size taken care of. So if you are doing a convergent mixed method, you need a sample size for your qualitative parallel side, and you need a larger sample size for your quantitative parallel side. So the issue of sample size there has to be clear, and in your writing you also need to indicate how big was the sample size for qualitative side, how big was the sample size for qualitative side. That becomes very important. So sample size is a factor in mixed method. Each way would require a sample size. Even if you are to do an explanatory, so from an explanatory sequential design, you would need a larger sample size, and then because you start with quantitative, then you follow up with a smaller sample size, which is for the qualitative. And in the exploratory one, you would need a smaller sample size first, because you are starting with a qualitative design. Then you would need to use that in order for you to come up with an instrument that you are going to administer for quantitative research. And the sample size for the quantitative research has to be bigger. Like we said earlier, the other week, that people are now talking in the range of 1,000 going up, and all that. So sample size is very important. I don't know, Dr. Mari, there is another question here. There are a lot, these ones. I don't know. This one we have read it. Please advise, am I correct to say for embedded design, I can use two samples, e.g. interview municipality officials and administer questionnaires to community members? Thank you. Dr. Mari.
Yes, I think, of course, as we have said, that if you are using an embedded mixed research design, you have to make sure that you cater for sampling techniques that comes from a probability sampling side. And also, if you are using a qualitative side in terms of interviews, you also need to bring in the non-probability sampling. So for example, maybe municipal officials probably are going to use maybe purposive sampling or convenience sampling, whereas when you are doing probably to administer questionnaires in a community, probably are going to use simple random sampling or systematic sampling or quota sampling, depending on the sampling techniques that you want to use for that particular area. But make sure that each research methodology, if it's quantitative, it's probability sampling techniques. If it's qualitative, it's non-probability sampling techniques. But you have to use different sampling techniques in that particular study. That's very correct.
I don't know. I don't know if there is anyone here. Okay, I think the other ones were issues. I don't know whether Vivian is still around. Vivian, I think during the week she was asking to, what was the question again, Vivian? If you can type it in the chat box, or if you can say it. I know many people here are afraid of saying things online. They don't want with their voice. And one of you who is using a mixed method here, perhaps? Ishmael, are you using a mixed method?
No, I'm not using a mixed method.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What are you using?
Mine is qualitative.
Oh. There are qualitative researchers there. You missed the presentation on qualitative research, I think.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just got in, but I'm following.
All right. Okay, I don't know whether Vivian has typed that. Lina says, I'm using a mixed method. Looks like Zoom is hibernative conference tool. I don't know what Denford is talking about. Denford always talk in redos. Okay, Cindy is using a mixed method. Okay. Dr. Mnangatile, what was the question again? Can you come back with it? I think Vivian, during the week, she was asking about conceptual and theoretical framework, but she doesn't want to confirm it. Oh, Denford is saying that people always hide behind the screen. Yeah, that's the challenge. Yeah, I want to cover it, Vivian, as we close off this session, but I want you to repeat the question for me so that I know what am I responding to. Dr. Mnangatire, come back with your question again. It's gonna help others. Okay, she's asking, how do I come up with a conceptual model, Dr. Murray? How do I come up with a conceptual model?
At what level? I think it's important to know conceptual model. At what level? Is it at master's, PhD? Where exactly is she pitching this so that we know?
I think she's doing a master's at the University of Pretoria.
Okay. So usually conceptual models are usually a result of actually reading literature. For example, it's a combination of literature, but also using data that you have gotten from the field to come up with a conceptual model that can actually explain whatever phenomenon you are dealing with. Let's say, for example, I'm talking about motivation, for example. And for example, most of the literature that you probably are going to find around the concept, even the conceptual models that you're going to find right now in existence, most of them are coming from the global north. It's your McGregor's theory, X and Y, it's your Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all that kind of thing. So what you do is that you take all that which is coming from literature, and then you go and do your data collection. From your data collection, that's where a conceptual model must evolve. Or if it doesn't evolve from there, it can actually evolve on the basis of actually marrying two different conceptual models. For example, if I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the theory of McGregor's theory X and theory Y, if I can mix the two and come up with a totally hybrid model, that's what we call building a conceptual model. That's how you can come up with a new conceptual model to say, for us to be able to understand what exactly happens at the level of motivation. The only way we can do that is by making sure that we have a newer model that can actually be able to account for what Maslow talked about, but also what McGregor has talked about. So it can happen at two levels, where you're actually using data and literature to come up with your own conceptual model, or you can actually merge existing conceptual models to come up with a totally new or hybrid conceptual model that can actually explain whatever you want to explain.
Okay, so Vivian, what we are simply saying here is maybe one of the things that you might need to have an understanding on is to know what a conceptual framework or a conceptual model is. So for me, when I teach my methodology class, I normally use it simply like saying, if I am to talk about this topic that I am projecting on my screen, it's one of my papers in progress, can I put this in a diagram? Right? Can I put whatever I'm putting there, the influence of course experience, satisfaction, loyalty on student, word of mouth, and re-enrollment intentions. If I were to put it in a diagram, how does it look? So that's the basic level of understanding all this stuff. I'm not sure if my screen is still showing. So in other words, I had read literature, and then I come up with this. Then this becomes my proposed model. That becomes my proposed model. So in addition to what Dr. Murray was saying, if you are to come up with a conceptual framework, the first thing that you need to do is to select the topic of your research, which we think you have done at this point. And it's better to make sure that the research topic is actually within your field of specialization, so that you will be able to understand constructs that are in literature. So after that's the first step. Then the second step is for you to do a comprehensive literature review, so that you understand what research has already done on the topic you are working on. Then you must always stick to reliable sources. Please stick to reliable sources. Don't read some fun other journal articles that you always meet on the internet, please. So after doing that, you look at specific variables. You look at specific variables. Like in this model, I am presenting specific variables: course experience, student satisfaction, student loyalty. And I want to find out if these three have got a direct influence on student word of mouth communication, and see if these three have got an indirect effect on re-enrollment enrollment intentions. So look at those specific variables look at the specific variables as they explained in literature, and examine the relationship. So for me to come up with this, it's based on the literature that I have reviewed. That gives me some sense that there is this kind of relationship, and I would want to test this kind of relationship. So once you have identified the variables, you can now create your conceptual framework, like what I'm doing here. But make sure that your dissertation is actually going to contribute to a framework that is new. That is very critical. If this kind of framework exists, please think about a new framework that we haven't seen in literature. And if I see that this framework you claim to have developed actually exist, I'll make a comment nicely that this doesn't add to any contribution. I'm sure at master's contribution doesn't really matter, but at PhD it does. You need to make sure that the conceptual framework you are coming up with is something that we have never seen, or we have modified something that existed and make it new. So make it new to what's already out there, and then you try to refine your arguments in terms of the hypothesis that you would have developed. Then thereafter you create your conceptual framework. It can be in a flow chart like this. It can be in a mind map. It can be in a concept map and all that. Then you discuss, you put some narrative to this conceptual framework, and then you go on with your framework. I think today we have talked a lot. One more issue then. Okay.
Hello, Dr. Oyo.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, I'm doing a study, right? Then I would like to start by doing a scoping review on my particular topic. Then this will be followed up with the either quali or quanti and the like. So it has several phases. It can have 3 phases. In terms of the design as a mixed method, where does it fit in? How does the scoping review speak with the other methods that are going to follow up?
But in a scoping review, unless if I am not sure about it, but in a scoping review, all you are doing is to get a sense or an overview of available research.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but that really doesn't that really doesn't give me much more information in terms of what kind of design is probably appropriate for you. Perhaps further information that I may want to ask is, what is your expected outcome?
Your expected outcome is we want to design an intervention. An intervention with regard to what can I call it? Emotional intelligence in nurses, right? So what you want to do is, firstly, you want to see what is out there, what has been used before, how has it worked, and the like, before you actually engage into your own research. So in the second phase, I can do both testing the knowledge level or the skill, emotional skill level, emotional intelligence skill level in a quantitative way. And then I can also follow up with a qualitative to understand what is it that is influencing this skill level. So those two, that phase is very clear how I can bring the two together in a mixed method. But how is the scoping review communicating with these others in the nature of a mixed method design?
Okay, but for me, from what we are presenting, I am more inclined to suggest you need to follow an embedded mixed method design. I don't know what Dr. Mari thinks.
I was also duty bound to actually say the same, that I think in that regard, I think an embedded kind of mixed method design would actually work, because if you were to use an explanatory or exploratory sequential design, it may work, but it may only work when you are doing probably what we would then call a multiple mixed method design, where you have study number 1, study number 2, or phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, going forward. That's when you can then be able to speak about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Vivian wants to ask something. Please ask the last question. We want to close off the session for today. Vivian, go ahead. Instead of typing, you should just come up there and say your question. Okay, I'm just waiting for this person to type, and then we close off. So that is what we were thinking about sharing with you, and I hope that in this session, it is going to be helpful for you as you write your studies, write your papers, and all that. I'm sure you will be able to use this mixed method design. I see some people are already excited to do all that. Vivian, are you still typing, or can I close this session? Okay, so I don't know, maybe, okay, there's one chat that pops in, so let me see. Okay, she says she's fine. So I think we have covered probably the most dominant approaches in methodology. We started off with qualitative, and someone came in and do qualitative data analysis for us block by block. And we actually learned, and we moved on to quantitative. We also did the analysis, and now we have done a mixed methods approach. And we hope that this kind of sessions are going to be helpful for your master's degrees, your PhDs, those of you who are doing PhDs and articles. We also hope that this is going to be beneficial. I don't know, do we still need to talk about methodology, or we talk about other stuff? I don't know. You are free to give us those suggestions so that we see what we can talk about in the next week. Someone wanted to say
okay,
something.
Dr. Oyo, I don't know if it will be relevant to maybe get a glimpse. Maybe you have covered this before, but what constitutes a PhD problem, and what constitutes a master's problem? I've had cases where students would present what they think is their PhD, and the comments will be like, okay, this is very good, but only for a master's.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Maybe Dr. Mare, problem statement, focusing on different levels. Of course, we have got a mixed audience here. We've got both masters and PhDs.
Yes, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think also because sometimes also master students also, they are doing a master's, but they want to change the world. And sometimes they end up getting suffocated in the process.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a valid point. We don't have problems talking about the problem statement, perhaps differentiating that if you are at master's level, these are critical issues. If you are at doctoral level, these are critical issues. I think we will visit that and see. I'm not sure if it's for next week, or if it's for the other time, but we would welcome you saying what are the issues perhaps that you would want help from, so that it informs our discussion. Because primarily what we're doing is we're taking issues that we see in our students, and then we try and come and discuss them here. So if also as people who are working on things, you are free to suggest to us what we should be doing to help you advance, because our aim here is to capacitate our own people and see if they can become independent scholars, independent thinkers, graduates who finish their studies on time. That's the major idea of this platform. Dr. Mare, I don't think there is any other thing here except, so someone is saying, I support the suggestion by Dr. Mnangatire, research methodology is a good topic and all that. So we will see. We will advise you during the week what we would have decided to take forward in the next discussion and all that. In exploratory sequential method, do you first establish quantitative set of results or qualitative? In exploratory, you first establish qualitative results. Then you use those qualitative results to build an instrument that is supposed to be used in a quantitative design or in a quantitative methodology. Then it goes on like that. That's the sequence. Qualitative first, followed by quantitative. Over to you, Dr. Mare, so that you just close the session for us and then we move.
Yeah, so for me, I think essentially we'll sit down and see what we can do going forward. But I think maybe if there are a session that we're going to continue with on these research methods, it would be 1 or 2 where we just probably try and thrash out probably these newer methods that are being used now in the context of COVID-19, because now we've seen more of online studies, because all of a sudden face-to-face studies are becoming increasingly difficult because of social distancing issues. So probably we are going to have a session, I don't know, maybe next week or a week after next week, just to deal with these issues, to say, in a context like now where we have a global pandemic, how do you proceed with your studies and still continue to finish despite the challenges that you have to face? And what are the other ways of actually going around these challenges that we are facing? And then from there, I think we can then start talking about how do you write a proper literature review? How do you write a proper statement of the problem if you are at a master's or a PhD level? I think that could be another area that we need to look at and see how we can capacitate people.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining. You are encouraged to come and join and ask questions. We will also learn from you asking questions, and it helps us. So everyone here on this platform is learning. It's not like we're just giving you information. We are also learning from you, and you learn from us, and then it becomes balanced like that. So we're gonna communicate the details of the next meeting. It's always on Friday this time, but the topic is what we communicate weekly, but the time usually doesn't change unless if we have communicated earlier that we are not meeting or we are meeting later and all that. So have a good weekend, everyone. Stay at home if you can, stay safe, practice social distancing if you can as well, and don't go out if you have nothing to do. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.